Okay, so today we are tackling a massive topic, the U.S. defense budget. But we're going to look at it from a really different angle, through the eyes of Anduril's founder, Palmer Luckey. He makes a pretty bold argument that when it comes to figuring out how strong a military is, we might be counting the wrong thing entirely. All right, let's get into it.
So not long ago, a proposal was put on the table to boost U.S. defense spending to $1.5 trillion. I mean, just to wrap your head around that number, the increase alone would be more than what most countries spend on their entire defense budget for a year. It's just a mind-boggling amount of money.
And that huge number brings us right to the heart of the matter. Does just throwing more cash at the problem actually make a country any safer? According to Palmer Luckey, the answer is a hard no. In fact, he argues that our obsession with the dollar amount is a huge part of the problem itself.
Right, so let's start by digging into that idea. This disconnect between how much we spend and what we actually get. This isn't just about the total. It's about what we've decided to use as our measuring stick for strength in the first place.
So here's Luckey's core argument in a nutshell. We are measuring the wrong thing. He says that, for all kinds of reasons, success in defense is almost always measured by the input. You know, how many billions of dollars are flowing into a program. But what we should be focused on, he insists, is the output. What are we actually getting for all that money? How many ships are hitting the water? How many real usable tools are getting into the hands of soldiers?
And that really says it all, doesn't it? Anybody can just throw more money at something. The hard part, the part he believes the U.S. is struggling with, is actually turning those dollars into real, effective results without a ton of waste.
So what does this whole input versus output thing look like in the real world? Well, once you start comparing the U.S. to other countries, what sounds like a theory becomes a really stark problem with some serious global implications.
He makes the point that even though the U.S. outspends its rivals, sometimes by 3 or 4 times, other nations are just getting way more bang for their buck. This creates what he calls an efficiency gap, where our massive spending advantage just isn't translating into the kind of capability advantage you'd expect.
And he uses China as the prime example. He says that even if you take the official numbers showing China spends way less than the U.S., its industrial output can be double, triple, or even quadruple what the United States produces. Now, you could argue that's because of things like lower labor costs, but Luckey's point is that the difference in actual physical stuff being built is so huge, you can't just explain it away that easily.
And get a load of this number. For the most dramatic example, look at shipbuilding. It's a critical measure of naval power. He claims China has somewhere between 250 to 300 times more shipbuilding capacity than the United States. That's not just a gap, that's a chasm.
Okay, so you have to ask, why? Why does this huge inefficiency exist? Well, according to Luckey, it is absolutely not an accident. He says the system itself is built with what he calls perverse incentives that actually reward being wasteful.
It's a wild question, right? If the goal is supposed to be national security, why would the system that buys all the equipment actually reward behavior that seems to undermine it? Luckey points his finger at one very specific, very old practice.
He argues the main culprit is something called cost-plus contracting. Basically, it means a company gets paid for all its costs, whatever they turn out to be, plus a guaranteed profit on top. Now, just think about the incentives there for a second. If your profit is just a percentage of your total cost, what's your motivation to be efficient? If you take longer and spend more money, you literally make more profit. It rewards building things that are super complex and break down because, hey, you get those profitable maintenance contracts. It means there's almost no real penalty for being years late and billions of dollars over budget.
And he really hammers this point home. This isn't some new thing. It's not because of a recent supply chain snag or anything like that. He sees it as a deep, systemic pattern that's been going on for decades, where being late and over budget is just business as usual.
So if that's the problem, what's the solution? Well, Luckey suggests a totally different way of thinking, one that comes straight out of the startup world of Silicon Valley.
He contrasts the two models. On one hand, you have legacy defense companies that often take their profits and prioritize paying out dividends to investors. But the startup model, which is what his company, Anduril, does, is the complete opposite. Instead of paying out profits, they plow that money right back into the business, building new factories, funding more research. In fact, he claims that 100% of Anduril's revenue, plus even more private money they raise, goes straight back into R&D to solve the next big problem. The entire goal is nonstop innovation and growth, not just keeping shareholders happy in the short term.
And this quote pretty much sums up that challenger attitude. He's basically throwing down the gauntlet and saying, look, if all we're doing is delivering on time and on budget, and that's considered unfair competition, then yeah, we deserve to win.
Now, this different business model is also designed to fuel a very different vision for the future of technology in defense.
You really have to understand that at its heart, Anduril is one giant bet on artificial intelligence. Luckey believes AI is the key to unlocking defense systems that are not only more effective but also more efficient and ultimately safer.
So why is this move to autonomy so important? Well, think about it. If your entire force relies on remote-controlled drones, it has a massive weak spot: communications. If an enemy jams your signal, your whole force could be neutralized instantly. But autonomous systems, systems that can think for themselves, don't have that weakness. They can operate even when cut off. And just as importantly, they completely change the cost calculation. You don't need a human pilot, which means you don't need a cockpit, you don't need life support, and you don't need to spend millions training someone. You can build cheaper, more expendable systems, and you can afford to lose the machine without losing a person.
And this brings us right back to where we started. The whole idea is that by pairing a business model that rewards efficiency with smarter, AI-driven technology, we can actually deliver the security a country needs for far, far less money. The goal isn't to spend that $1.5 trillion better, it's to get the same capability for well under $1 trillion.
So we'll leave you with this to chew on. When we talk about national strength, what really matters more? Is it the sheer size of the budget we pour into the system, or is it the power and the ingenuity of the ideas that money is supposed to be buying? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.